You know something I love? Five Nights at Freddy's. No, I'm serious. I know the title and general video premise implies otherwise, but I really do have a soft spot for this Spoopy Bear franchise. I was first made aware of Freddy's back when I was just 10 years old, around the second game's release, and it's kept my attention ever since. I was really scared of Toy Bonnie in particular. I couldn't tell you why, but for some reason that was the character that really messed me up. This video won't feature the most positive of looks at the overall franchise, so I do want to make clear ahead of time that this isn't coming from any place of malice. I love Fnaf, it's far from perfect, but there's a lot of aspects found throughout it that I think are genuinely great. The fun times, Vanny, UCN, the original cast, like every soundtrack, Helpy, Music Man, The Puppet, Michael, pretty much anything to do with Afton is on a level of accidental genius. God, I love that character. A video covering every single iteration of Springtrap has been bouncing around my mind for, like, over a year at this point. Like, I cannot stress enough how devilishly good a fundamental concept Springtrap is. God, he's amazing. However, with FNAF's big 10th anniversary recently passing us by, and a lot of different things going on all across the brand, I couldn't help but get this sense of the magic having faded a bit. There was just something missing in all of this. Some nebulous, unexplainable quality that I feel is now absent from the IP. It got me pondering on the entirety of the franchise, as anniversaries tend to do, and led to me conjuring up an encapsulating question. Is Five Nights at Freddy's on its way out? Now, when I say on its way out, I don't mean, like, permanently, like cancellation or anything. I'm not stupid enough to suggest that this franchise will stop turning a profit anytime soon. FNAF has grown far too big for that to be any sort of perceivable concern, with viewers, buyers, and merchandise gobbling up fanatics in the tens of millions at least. That number only growing as more fan games and fan content and porn keeps getting released to tide people over in between official installments. It's not talked about much, but at this point, the fan base is an entirely self-perpetuating entity, you know. I'm not here to ask if FNAF is outright ending anytime soon, no. My question is if FNAF's golden years are behind it. If its time as one of, if not the titan of indie horror is drawing to a close. I think the best comparison here would be the MCU and kind of the superhero genre at large, honestly. During the late 2010s, the MCU was the king of the entertainment industry. The big boy sat at the absolute top of the food chain. No one could beat it, everyone wanted to be it. In this particular period of time, Marvel could have spat out mucus onto a dirty napkin, and it still would have made $1 billion. However, at a certain point, specifically as the endgame fallout was winding down, the MCU just stopped being on top. Audiences everywhere kind of just collectively decided they were satisfied and they'd had enough. The movies still made boatloads of cash, and still do today, but it was no longer the untouchable titan of the industry. That particular essence had left the franchise. The MCU's time in the spotlight had come to a close. And that's a fate I propose is coming for Five Nights at Freddy's. That this franchise will still keep chugging along no problem, but its position as the face of indie horror, its time as the king of them all, is up.
Your time is up.
One of the biggest things that sticks out to me about FNAF's current state and this looming idea that its biggest years are behind us lie in the reactions newer entries get from a wider, casual audience. Or rather, the lack of reactions, because at Five Nights at Freddy's has not made any major impact in quite a while. Ignoring the movie, because that did get quite big, but that's a special case that we'll get to in due course. When was the last time Fnaf really made a splash with its latest release? The books? No, they're the closest thing this franchise has to a niche. Ruin? I don't think so. Sure, it turned a fair few heads, but compare it to the sheer impact felt by Security Breach, and it's not even a competition. Help Wanted 2? Oh man, this one's kinda sad, honestly. Does Help Wanted 2 even exist? I have legit heard nothing about this game outside of fandom circles. I don't even know what mini-games are found within it. I do not know what lore Help Wanted 2 contains, and that's when you know a FNAF product's failed. Hell, even the anniversary didn't bring in as much attention as I assumed it would, considering, 10th anniversary. It featured some very flashy announcements and offered content galore, but not even that seemed to breach the wider pop culture sphere. Though the Fnaf account tweeting out a bunch of celebratory things on the anniversary date itself was incredibly sweet, I want to put that out there. Looking at things from a broader perspective too, indie horror has new faces that are grabbing people's attention now, and they're grabbing far harder than Fnaf is currently able to. Poppy playtime is pretty pathetic, but it has a level of polish Fnaf could only dream of, and as much as we all like to collectively pretend we're above such simple enticements, shiny graphics really do go a long way when it comes to our perception. The game was quite literally engineered to become the next big thing, its creators having a long history analysing digital trends, specifically in the indie horror space. While that does make me feel a deep sense of disgust whenever I find myself going down the Poppy playtime rabbit hole, I mean, fuck, man, they really do know how to keep you engaged. They have done their homework on this stuff. Lore elements introduced at an insidiously planned pace. Marketable designs executed with surgical precision. The prototype is honestly kind of genius in how he constantly engages the loud, visual side of our brain, yet never gives us enough information to let us stop thinking about him. The game is a borderline evil business practice considering its target audience, but I cannot deny how effective it all is. Ban Ban sits on the exact opposite end of that spectrum, being so unpolished, messy and scattershot that it becomes absolutely enthralling. It's a train wreck you can't look away from, one absolutely bursting with character and personality in its own special way. Ironically enough, the Euphoric brothers ended up utilizing the very same tactic Scott Cawthon once implemented to cement FNAF's place on the map. These rapid-fire releases every few months to keep the IP on everyone's minds. In both cases, it's worked like a charm, and done quite a lot of the legwork to set said brands up for longer-lasting success. Poppy has the polish, and Ban Ban has the bombastics. Both are elements Fnaf does also possess, but not in large enough quantities to combat either franchise. For the longest time, the thing Fnaf had over everyone else was its lore! But even that is starting to lose its punch. What began as a frustratingly complicated, yet still tantalizingly solvable puzzle, over time has slowly morphed into an endless nightmare of entangled ideas, parallel universes, sci-fi shenanigans, red herrings, rushed concepts, retcons on top of retcons. It's a mess. Fnaf's lore has kind of reached its boiling point. What was once an incredibly engaging aspect of the franchise has confounded upon itself to such a degree, and simply grown and grown without establishing enough solid bedrock, that it's become this bloated behemoth not even worth tackling. We are now getting theories about creating theories. The question of, is Fnaf even solvable, is one I see far too frequently for it to be a good thing. I think Security Breach was the breaking point for most people. Well, what else is new? Taking the promising starting points the previous game had established, and not pushing them forwards in any meaningful way. Instead, degressing the story back towards elements we just started moving away from. And then it introduced its own weird ideas that either weren't properly explained or weren't properly thought out to begin with, that seemed to contradict what few certainties the overall story had left. Everything became more confusing, nothing was further solidified, and all of it seemed to focus on the past, rather than laying any foundations for the future. They've since tried to rectify this, half-heartedly pretending it was the Mimic all along, but it's not very convincing, and I think the damage has already been done. People have mentally checked out of this thing, by and large. Afton has been resurrected one too many times. Multiple different encapsulations of raw emotions are now cornerstones of the storytelling. They've gotta go back and do another prequel game just to attempt to give the overall narrative some semblance of cohesion. We've got our big new villain. The next face of the franchise is technically here, but no one cares. No one's buying it, because it's all just bark with no bite. The Mimic has been touted as the next big thing, but hasn't earned that reputation at all. And if you want even a taste of why he might be worthy of fitting that role, then you've gotta hop mediums and scavenge through at least 25 different fucking novellas. They somehow made an industry plant animatronic? How do you even fucking manage that in an indie franchise? Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Fnaf isn't exactly an indie franchise anymore. The books, the movies, even the games. These are no longer things Scott Cawthon makes. They're things he oversees. And not very well, from what we understand. A slow but steady shift into the world of corporations and studios has been occurring within Fnaf for quite a while now, and while these guys all try to maintain the spirit of the original work, their marketing first and focus group tested mindsets can't help but shine through. A certain charm has left the franchise, that once present feeling of just a single individual braving the metaphorical mountain for the sake of creation, and making plenty of mistakes along the way, but learning from them and improving as a person. A real human quality that perhaps isn't gone, but well, a lot of my problems with current Fnaf feel eerily close to the kinds of issues I find in my favourite AAA franchises, and I don't think that's a good thing. Security Breach was, once again, the moment it all came to a head. A quick detour here, but Security Breach is absolutely this generation's Sonic 06. Right? A popular kids franchise with a large adult following releases an atrociously buggy, glitchy mess of a game that features new ideas and presentational values that are not welcomed at the time of its release, though later embraced by newer members of the community, and creates such an impact that it permanently taints the public perception of the franchise. I sense some slight parallels there. And now you might mention that Security Breach never made quite the wave Sonic 06 did. It never reached that top 10 worst of all time, legendarily bad type status, and while you're absolutely right, I think that more so speaks to how different fandom culture and, more importantly, the state of the gaming industry is nowadays. Half-finished, bug-ridden messes are practically the norm now, unfortunately, so Security Breach was never going to stick out from the crowd in quite the same way 06 once did. Cyberpunk was way worse on arrival, and definitely had an 06 level reception, but Cyberpunk bounced back. Some solid updates and a killer anime eventually got the majority back on this one's side, but Security Breach? Well, this is when the whole classic versus modern Fnaf debates really started heating up, and I know a certain other franchise where I've heard those terms before. Anyway, detour over. I just wanted to put that idea out there finally. I've been sitting on that one for quite a few years now, you know. Steel Wool Studios' previous game, Help Wanted, felt like a wonderful showcase for the potential of Scott's expanding partnerships, granting all the benefits of studio involvement, with none of the drawbacks. The tone, atmosphere, comedy, degrees of violence and mild intelligence, it all still felt very Five Nights at Freddy's, simply enhanced by all the goodies a studio budget provides. Then, just one game later, we got Security Breach, and look, I'm not gonna pretend to know what went on behind the scenes here, but it certainly felt like the balance had been majorly tipped in Steel Wool's favour. While Help Wanted largely maintained the grungy, dirty vibes that come part and parcel with a Five Nights at Freddy's game, Security Breach tossed those out in favour of a shiny, flashy, modernized, very soft around the edges kind of world and location. A sanitized, more inherently marketable product with a wildly different attitude towards even handling the Fnaf IP. Bright colours, fantastical vibes, quirkiness in favour of uneasiness. A subtle but strong move away from the more realistic undertones of prior games, taking that final step into full-blown cartoonishness. Furries were always a thing lurking off to the side of Fnaf due to the nature of the franchise, but I don't think it's a coincidence that this is the game where they started actively appealing to that audience. I mean, Freddy went from one of the toughest enemies of the first game to not even an enemy in this one. He's your fucking Tumblr sexy man, couldn't hurt a fly, precious bean, AI assistant sidekick now. That says it all really, doesn't it? There's an impression that could be made here that I'm nostalgia blind towards the original games, that I believe Scott remaining indie would have solved all of our problems, and I'd like to dispel that idea now. As stated previously, I think Help Wanted is great. I think that game's a wonderful example of how fruitful the results of studio involvement could be, as long as a strong balance is maintained, as long as Fnaf's identity, both blatant and underlying, remains preserved. I think getting bigger entities on board produces some of the best results in the franchise. However, I don't think Security Breach maintains that balance. I don't think it preserves that identity, and I don't think any game released since has has either. Ruin is absolutely a step in the right direction. It's a lot closer to achieving the kind of thing everyone was always wanting, but it's still several steps behind. And I don't think I'm alone in that line of thinking at all. Poppy Playtime comparisons being made ad nauseum upon Security Breach's launch by a lot of people within the fanbase. I prefer the original games because they feel like passion projects first. A thing some guy made because he enjoyed making video games and wanted to bring smiles to people's faces. Any long-term money or audience he happened to cultivate being secondary to just the joy of the creative process. The recent entries, the studio-developed ones, don't give off that same vibe. There's undoubtedly just as much passion and care from everyone involved in crafting them, but it doesn't feel like the primary focus anymore. Theory baiting, overly complicated lore, incredibly marketable designs, genuine interpersonal relationships between expressive furry characters. That's what's front and center when I look at a Fnaf game now, and it feels very intentional. That up-and-coming Fall Fest game that's looking to be yet another step back in the timeline to the new earliest days of Freddy's feels like an incredibly calculated move, rather than being whatever Scott's mind just happened to drift towards for the next installment. Now, I don't know the details, and I'm not looking to paint Steel Wool as some soulless hacks. Doing even the slightest bit of research makes very clear that both parties are equally involved in the decision-making process for these games, that this is not a black and white affair. But regardless of the details, this new direction has certainly created a different vibe across the franchise. One that I can't necessarily call better than what we had before, because I'm not sure it's doing too much good, by and large. It's creating so many rifts. Rifts among the fanbase, rifts within the franchise, even rifts between community generations. See, there's a growing stagnation on Scott's end regarding his involvement with any prominent community figures. When the games were the new kids on the block a decade ago, a select handful of creators stood out as ones that really loved the franchise Scott was building out. They were incredibly loyal fans who dived into every new teaser and line of website code with such enthusiasm, eventually morphing into something of a representative for the wider fandom. Scott quickly got into contact with these guys and slowly built up good and friendly relationships with all of them that have lasted strong to this day. They're the old gods of Fnaf in many ways, and they're great. I may not be hugely into much of their content anymore, but they come off like very nice people. I've seen nothing but good things from all of these guys. However, they're getting older. Like, a decade older. And perhaps more importantly, they all hail from the same era of the franchise. The merciless passage of time combined with the very real shifts in tone and identity the brand has slowly undergone has rather clearly left these guys all a bit less enthused about the current state of Fnaf. And that's fine. Don't get me wrong, growing as a person and moving on to new pastures is a perfectly understandable thing. It's very healthy, actually. But the issues start emerging with the fact that these same 5 or so creators that are clearly growing a bit tired of the franchise are still the big, main, singular fandom representatives. Fnaf has evolved, its community pillars have not. While the games have changed and ushered in a whole new wave of people who enjoy the franchise in very different ways, the folks representing all of it are still those same old gods. The group that fell in love with Five Nights at Freddy's for its dark and messy and debatably realistic undertones are stuck remaining as the spokespeople for an entirely fresh group that love Five Nights at Freddy's for its wackiness and exuberant characters and sci-fi complexities. Why aren't there any fresher faces getting the same levels of opportunity and access to the creator as the guys who helped make the franchise a success 10 years ago? Why is there nobody to represent the current fans of Fnaf? Sure, I don't care for Security Breach and everything it sets up, but plenty of people do, and more importantly, that is clearly the direction this franchise is going to continue heading in. So why are people not being brought on board who earnestly enjoy everything that direction entails? I have some theories, ironically enough, most of them unfortunately having to do with the more negative incidents that have occurred across the last few years, but regardless of the why, would it not be more healthy for the community and for the brand long term to mix some new gods in with the old ones? It suggests a level of uncertainty on Scott's part. He seems almost trapped between two different worlds right now. There's a side of him that probably wants to welcome in a fresh generation, but is understandably weary of the growing toxicity. A side that wants to let the franchise move forward, but is just too damn attached to the past. A side that probably wants to retire, but just fucking hasn't yet. Now, I'm not here to police how Scott should be handling the IP. Unlike other franchises I love, Fnaf certainly isn't committee ran. It's still all owned by just one guy. One very human guy, who's probably been thinking about all of this stuff himself. He'll make whatever decisions he's going to make, and ultimately I wish him all the best. He seems very nice, but this whole refusing to leave your comfort zone vibe I get from him regarding community representatives isn't going to do any good. It's going to further those rifts within the community I mentioned previously, and it's going to create a larger divide between Scott and the fandom. There used to be a real energy to Scott's involvement with the fan base. It furthered that thoroughly indie vibe we once had going on. He felt like a real presence, someone who was there, really seeing how we all felt and acting accordingly. Now there's a feeling of remaining at arm's length, which is definitely not unwarranted, but certainly doesn't help the overall vibe that Fnaf is becoming just another AAA IP. Like, when you voice your opinions on the Sonic franchise, you don't expect the people in charge to see it. You know that feedback's ultimately getting lost to the internet void. Except for those rare instances where the official Sonic account comments on your video with less than 5,000 fucking views. Holy hell, that was a crazy moment. And that kind of energy is what's felt among Fnaf now. The parent has metaphorically left to go upstairs, and the kids are free to talk and play and fight amongst themselves. It certainly won't be heard. It all just further contributes to this feeling that Fnaf's time is kind of over. That it's simply melded into the mainstream and lost its special spark. Now, in another lifetime, this easily could have been where I ended the video. At this point, I think, or at least hope, I've made a pretty decent case for the current state of Five Nights at Freddy's, and gotten across the overall melancholic message I'm trying to push forward. I'd write up a little conclusion paragraph, chuck in some musings on the future of the franchise, and then call it a day. However, then they went and made a movie. The Fnaf movie is a special case. At first glance, this seems like a strong rebuttal to all of my points. This made waves in the wider pop culture sphere. This had satisfying, understandable, mostly lore. This was a moment that brought the entire community together in unity, and none of these points are wrong, but I think context matters a lot here. Think of what we're talking about. This isn't just any new Fnaf project. This is the movie. This is the Fnaf movie. Not a sequel, not a reboot, not a remake. This is the very first instance of this franchise on the big screen. That'd be a special moment among any community, and I speak from experience. On top of that, this technically isn't even a wholly new release either. The Fnaf movie had been in development hell for 8 entire years, since 2015. This project has been lurking in the background of this franchise for almost as long as said franchise has even been a thing. Throughout every shift in tone, every change of developer, every story U-turn and recontextualization, the fabled Fnaf movie has always been there. It's not just some random new installment that happened to gain traction. This was a monumental moment, and it was always going to be a monumental moment due to its history and build-up. It's that mythical Five Nights at Freddy's movie that always looked like it would just never quite release, finally gracing us with its presence, and relatively close to the 10th anniversary too, which certainly adds to the occasion. In many ways, it almost feels like a culmination point of a lot of things we've discussed today, and because of all of that, I think the movie was a bit of an outlier. I don't really see this lasting. I don't think the Fnaf movie so much broke the narrative I've been chronicling, as much as it was an exception to the rule. Freddy on the big screen for the first time ever. That's magic that cannot be recaptured. Any future films are just inherently going to cause a bit less of an impact. On top of that, and perhaps more crucially, the movie just wasn't very good. Five Nights at Freddy's 2023 has a fairly weak script. Most people are aware of this. Thin and wavering character motivations, loosely defined mechanics, a foggy at best sense of focus, a surprising lack of horror for an allegedly terrifying movie. It's just not particularly good as a piece of cinema, to be rather frank. You can enjoy it, of course. I'm not here to dissuade anyone from subjectively having fun. In fact, overall, I quite like the thing myself. But I've seen claims from certain diehards that this is a perfect movie, and no it's not. However, it's worth noting that the film's lack of cinematic quality isn't necessarily as big a problem here as it is with many other adaptations. Since the film's inception, Scott has made clear that the Fnaf movie was created for existing fans before anyone else. That was even a part of its marketing. I can't exactly blame the movie for jumping the gun on the animatronic's true nature, or skipping any semblance of establishment to dive straight into Afton, because that was almost the point. It's kind of this highlight reel of FNAF's greatest hits, going through all the classic beats and imagery, a sort of love letter to everything from a certain point in the franchise, and it definitely prioritizes all of that long before it focuses on being a tightly woven piece of cinema. On that basis, I can't really hate the thing. Its heart is certainly in the right place, and as a fan, I did quite enjoy myself. However, this being FNAF's bold first step into the theatrical space, it kind of needed to be a bit better than that. When a franchise becomes a movie, that gets so many new eyes on your IP. If handled correctly, it can downright revive a dying brand. Not only do you need to preserve what makes the franchise special, and show that off with confidence, which is where the previous example fails fucking miserably, but you also need to make the final product just a good movie in its own right. Cinema is a storytelling medium first and foremost, so if your story sucks, why should I come back for more? And that's where the FNAF movie largely falls apart. It represented what makes FNAF special very well, but it fails quite heavily outside of that. Anyone new who checked this thing out due to morbid curiosity, it probably isn't sticking around for any future installments. Why should they when all they're given are cartoonishly simplistic, good people and bad people morals? A setup we've seen play out 100 times over across horror films already, with any complexities that could have been mined from the source material to make this one feel more unique or removed, might I add. And the same level of terror-inducing horror as you'll find in a $5 Steam game. Oh god, non-fans are gonna leave en masse, especially when they realise every future story hinges on the same underdeveloped villain. Afton is kind of a microcosm of all the movie's problems, actually. Pops up arbitrarily, has no particular motivation, is given a level of gravitas that you'll only really get if you're an existing fan, leans way too heavily into the references and fan service aspects. Why is his suit half withered when, like, none of the other equally as old animatronics are? I mean, I know why it's like that. It's so that you can emulate Springtrap while not overriding the fact that this is still canonically just Spring Bonnie at this point in the timeline, but to an outsider, to someone who's only engaging with FNAF on the movie's level, they won't get any of that. Why does he want to control the animatronics? Why did he say, "I always come back" in such a wink and nod manner? And why is he even killing in the first place?
Why? Why?
I also think this interpretation of Afton is just way too over the top and goofy, but that's a far more personal critique. The fact the film was so fandom focused is also kind of a damaging move, from a certain perspective at least. If you're hoping to turn this one profitable movie into a more long-term success, which, spoiler alert, Blumhouse are, then it might not have been such a smart strategy to stuff the thing so full of game material. While there's still certain elements like the puppets and the fun times and Helpy on a personal note that would better round out this interpretation, a lot of the things fans needed to see in a Five Nights at Freddy's movie have already been quite thoroughly covered. You got your location, you got an abandoned location, your Fazbear history, your missing kids, the stuffing, Springlocks, Golden Freddy, Phone Guy, Baby in a roundabout roundabout way. Book references, the shadow animatronics, even Balloon Boy gets the important aspects implemented. Afton, I think, is once again a great example of all of this. Sure, he technically didn't complete the transformation into Springtrap, but outside of a slightly greener costume, what else is there to really cover here that wasn't already present? He's said the line, he's gotten spring-locked, he's already had a building collapse around him. Oh, they jumped the gun a bit with that one actually, and, as mentioned, his suit was already quite heavily withered. Everything that needs to be done when making use of William Afton has already been done. Sure, it'd be nice to see him go all the way and eventually maybe even adapt the Scraptrap look personally, please. But whereas before the whole Springtrap stuff could have been a strong sequel hook to engage fans, giving them something meaty to look forward to for the next installment. It's now just another element that, in all of the ways that matter, has basically already been covered. Now, just to clarify, because as the resident Sonic movie hater, I sound mighty hypocritical right now, I'm not inherently bashing the excessive use of game material in the Fnaf movie. Again, I quite enjoyed watching the film, and I found Afton to be a real highlight in many ways. The music that accompanies The Yellow Rabbit is so fucking good. I love that track to an unhealthy degree. But in the context of turning this one monumental moment into a longer-lasting film franchise, it probably wasn't the best idea to go so all out with the game content. I personally prefer that approach, but it probably shortens the lifespan of Freddy's cinematic ventures, which then, to bring things back to the bigger picture, once again adds to this idea that FNAF's time is coming to an end. The movie almost functioning as this big crazy celebratory party the night before everyone packs up and goes home. Thing is, I say that here as a negative, but if you watch the film from that perspective, I think it actually elevates the experience. Suddenly, it doesn't matter that the movie's lacking in more traditional qualities. All that fan service focus becomes awesome. It's like at the end of a TV show when they bring everyone back for the big finale. Everyone's here and it's great. You get Afton and you get Springtrap, functionally at least. Security Breach is in here, FNAF 2 is referenced, 3, 4, Pizzeria Simulator, goddamn Ella from the books. The movie suddenly becomes this wonderful cross-section of the entire franchise, making sure every single corner of it gets represented in some way. That then adds some insane weight to all of the fandom references. Getting all of the old gods to cameo, Dream Theory, Sparky the fucking dog. Tell me these are not the same kind of moves we often see getting pulled when other franchises reach their end. This abundance of winks and nods to the IP's past. This sweet, earnest, almost final tour, parading around everything that fans loved about the brand. When viewed under that light, I think the movie becomes kind of beautiful. This fan-first mentality Scott Cawthon pushed for, now suddenly reading as an hour-and-a-half long thank you message to the community. I mean, it certainly grants the use of That Living Tombstone song a whole new level of sincerity. Now doesn't it? Let's go back to that MCU comparison at the beginning. Avengers Endgame was a movie that was always going to be a big success. It was the grand finale, the culmination of everything, an earnest, final note from a decade-long franchise that people had grown very attached to. It did everything it needed to, had a ton of fan service, and left its audience with a big smile. And is any of this sounding familiar? This year has marked Five Nights at Freddy's 10th anniversary. That's an entire decade this franchise has been around. What started as a tiny, surprise indie hit has gradually ballooned into one of the biggest media empires of this generation, one that certainly left its mark on the wider gaming scene. However, as the big milestone passes us by, I can't help but get this sense that I'm satisfied. I've had enough. I've gotten everything I needed out of Fnaf. It could all come to an end tomorrow, and I'd be content. Maybe I'm alone in that. As I've hopefully made clear, plenty of people are still heavily invested in this thing and where it's going, but equally, many people aren't. A lot of kids who fell in love with Five Nights at Freddy's all the way back in 2014 are fully grown adults now. An entire generation has come and gone who were practically raised on this franchise, and citing myself as a source, I'm not entirely sure that was a good thing. Originally, IP copyright was only meant to last for 14 years. This was to ensure that creatives couldn't get lazy and simply sit on what they already owned to generate endless income. They had enough time to effectively market and spread and profit off of their creation, while not having enough time to get complacent. Disney would eventually ruin this because, of course they would. Their precious fucking mouse is more important than future-proofing a society to creatively thrive. It speaks to the idea that something can arrive on the scene, make hell of an impact, and then take its final bow, making way for something new. That an idea, a character, a franchise can influence a whole generation of people, and then just gracefully fade away. Something comes along, makes a big splash, and eventually leaves the spotlight. We've spent far more than just 5 nights at Freddy's by this point, and as we pass that one last big symbol of success, is it time for us to punch out and end our shift? Is it time for that grandfather clock to hit 6 AM and for the nightmare to end? Is it time for this restless soul, knowing its work is done, to gracefully fade away after living its happiest day? God, that was sappy. That was way too sappy a note to end the video on. Bite of 87, ha ha ha, you all like that one, right? Purple guy? Man behind the slaughter? Toreador March? Remember Buff Helpy? Hello everyone, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I had a lot of fun making this one. I hope that translated through into the video, and that you also enjoyed it. Yeah. If you did, and you want to help out, I have a Patreon page you can join for as little as
$1.
I also have a Ko-Fi if you want to give just a one-off donation. I also have a Twitter, which does not help me financially. And I'm probably not going to be on that website for too much longer because Elon is a sociopath. So there might also be a Blue Sky link in the description as well. I hope it was evident enough in the video itself, but just in case, I want to clarify that there's no bad blood between the old gods, as I called them in the video. Dorko, Razbowski, 8-Bit Ryan, Bazamalam, everyone in between. There's absolutely nothing against those guys. They all seem very sweet, very nice. Dorko especially, his reactions are always... they're always so fun to watch. My point was just that those guys should not be the only ones in the position they're in, and that, like, they're representative of an older era that the franchise isn't necessarily in anymore, but it's nothing against them as people. They should still be allowed to be big parts of this franchise, and everything that comes with that. Yeah. Same thing for Steel Wool. I criticized a lot of their artistic choices throughout this video, and I'm not a fan of many of them. I don't necessarily like the direction Fnaf is going in, but I don't hate Steel Wool by any stretch of the imagination. They seem like very, very nice people from what I've seen behind the scenes of them. They seem like a lovely bunch. I just don't vibe with their games, but, you know, they seem like wonderful people. They did actually make my favourite version of Afton in Glitch Trap. I didn't really get into it in the video. Again, I kind of want to make a video just all about Afton and the various different Afton interpretations throughout the years. But I love Glitch Trap. He's my favourite version. I think the costume is incredible. I think the storyline around it being like Afton's evil lingering around and forming into a whole other character, I think that's awesome. I love Glitch Trap. I think he's great in pretty much every way. He's creepy, he's funny, he's intimidating, he's cool. He's like everything in one, in all the perfect amount, like the perfect amount of doses, I was gonna say. I don't think that works, but he's great. I love me some Glitch Trap. Shame they're kind of moving away from him and everything that was kind of being set up with him in favor of the fucking Mimic, but oh well. At least people who like the Mimic can be happy with this direction. On that, I do just want to make a point that I am actually a little bit scared to upload this video, because Five Nights at Freddy's fans sometimes can be quite intense and intimidating and scary, and I've heard horror stories of some of the things some of them can do. So if you disagreed with this video, that's fine. Leave your feedback, in fact. You know, try and be respectful about it, but, you know, leave your feedback, leave your opinions, leave why you might have disagreed or agreed or whatever. That's fine. Just don't, like, dox me or stalk me or get my channel taken down. That's a thing that happened to some people. You know, all of that would be appreciated that you not do. That's you can dislike the video, you know, and dislike my points and stuff, but please don't, like, ruin my livelihood. That's kind of all I'm asking here. Oh, also, goddamn, shout out to Fusion Z Gamer. Not because of the content. I'm not a big fan of the content. I mean, get that bag and everything, but it's certainly not for me. But God bless this guy. He is like the only person I've come across who uploads HD footage of the Fnaf games without a pissy little watermark icon YouTube subscription box thing in the bottom right hand corner of the video. He's like the only person who does that, and it makes getting footage on my end to use in my video a lot easier. So thank you, Fusion. Shout out to Fusion. He seems like another good guy. So yeah, Fusion, you get the niknok seal of approval. Not that that means anything. But yeah, I think that's everything I needed to say. Thank you again for watching. Feel free to support so that the videos can get better and all that good stuff. If you're a Fnaf fan who has discovered me for the first time, please don't try and kill me. That's all I think I wanted to say. And fun little fact about the date I am recording this, it is currently the 19th, and last night they uploaded a teaser of Toy Freddy from the second movie, and Freddy is, you know, he's a little, how do I say, he's, you know, come on guys, he's kind of